You're listening to Errol Parker and Clancy Overall, editors of the Batuta Advocate, on Desert Rock FM. Now, welcome to the Batuta Advocate radio show, recording live out of downtown Batuta in the Queensland Channel Country. Errol and I like to envision ourselves as writers of some sort. We're more reporters, I suppose. I guess, how would you say, in Australian literature there are a couple household names.
There are, and they're all in the foyer of the Pan Macmillan publishing office down there in Sydney.
You'd very find a name like today's guest where it can be recited to you by a child or an adult, a teenager, just such a varying net he has cast with his readership over the years.
Certainly not talking about Tim the Ponytail, are we?
No, we're definitely not. Not talking about small town WA. We're talking about John Marsden, a universal Australian, as I mentioned earlier, has spoken to almost generations of young adult fiction readers in Australia. You're back writing.
Yeah, I can't stop myself. And I am a fan of Tim the Ponytail. I'd just like to say I really admire what he does.
We write about Tim Winton quite a lot, actually.
Yes.
But it is amazing when you read Tim Winton's books how you automatically feel like you understand Western Australia so well. A lot of people, that's a lot of people's only experience of Western Australia.
But that's an incredible skill that he brings to it. And that one where they end up with the plane crashing in the remote harbour somewhere, and someone's drowning in the plane, and by complete chance and 1 in a million coincidence, the person's ex-partner happens to be scuba diving in that same place and rescues them. And people hated that ending, but I thought it was hilarious. So,
Now, John Marsden, how many years you've been in the game now, writing?
about 30.
30. You started, you were a teacher for many years.
Yeah, still am.
Still am? But you were teaching in Geelong Grammar, and you just pulled the pin one day and said you were going to get into it, going to get stuck in?
Not really. I had 6 books published before I left Geelong Grammar, but I wanted to just make sure I could make a living as an author. And so I took a term off on long service leave, actually, and got a lot of gigs doing workshops around the place, and they turned out to be much better paid than staying as a teacher. So I thought, hello, this is all right. So I quit teaching and went on the road, but then went back to teaching eventually.
Now, you saw a kind of return to reading in your time as a published author.
Yeah.
We can always talk about how Harry Potter changed the game for young kids.
Yeah.
Hugely, yeah.
But you had a similar effect. There's a lot of, you were in the curriculum, there are a lot of kids who read Tomorrow When the War Began series, front to back.
Yeah, and I got those kind of heady moments where I had people queuing up at bookshops to get the next copy when it was released at 9 a.m. or whatever. And just a little touch of Harry Potter about that. I mean, they weren't queuing around the block at midnight, but they were keen enough to get there and be on the doorstep when the shop opened. So, yeah, I loved it. And it was incredibly exhilarating because books meant so much to me as a kid. I mean, I read my way. That's how I survived, living in Devonport, Tasmania, where I grew up. And it was pretty tough in some ways. So books were my kind of lifeline, and I lived in a world of fiction a lot of the time. To know that I've had some sort of impact like that on other readers is quite exhilarating.
So were you teaching when you were writing the Tomorrow books? Because you wrote them year after year, you know, it's almost
I
like
quit teaching by that point.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wrote the first one in a kind of frenzy. It was very intense. It went for only a few months, but I was just living, breathing and eating Tomorrow When the War Began. And I remember a neighbour who lived about 2 k's away dropped in, really great bloke, and he came to the front door, and I was like, oh shit, I'm in the last chapter, middle of the last chapter of the book. And after about 2 minutes of awkward conversation, I said to him, look, you know, Al, I really hate to say this, but I just can't leave this book. And
I'm on a roll here, buddy.
Yeah, and he was great. He said, that's fine. And he was out the door in 30 seconds. And I've always been grateful to him for that because I didn't want to lose that momentum.
Yeah. Everyone knows about writer's block. People who don't know about writing, even people who don't know or don't write know about writer's block. There's the opposite. Do you very much feel that? Have you found that?
I've had both, yeah.
You hit your straps. You can feel that too?
Yeah, I had writer's block till I was about 28. And, no, older than that, actually. I was teaching at Timbertop in the mid-'80s, so I was about 35. And the Women's Weekly came to do a story on the school, and there was a photographer and a journalist. And the next day, after they'd gone, the kids told me how they'd showed the photographer an article I'd written in the school magazine the year before. And I don't know why they showed it to him, but apparently he read it, and according to them, he said, this bloke's in the wrong job, he should be writing. And that was just the catalyst. I just thought, well, I've always wanted to be a writer. Why the hell haven't I been able to do it? What's stopping me? And I did kind of unpack the way I was writing, and I thought, okay, I'm going to change everything about the way I approach it. And that was what unleashed the kind of flow of words. So what I did was to stop editing as I wrote. Instead of scrutinising every sentence and trying to make sure every sentence was perfect before I went on to the next one, I just wrote the whole damn book without looking back once, and then did the editing after I'd finished.
Is that how you kind of get into the groove as you're writing? Like, do you just aim to just, like, I know that Stephen King has a rule where he says, you know, he tries to write 2,000 words a day. And he does that religiously, where Hemingway had one sort of thing that he did where he used to write first thing in the morning, and he used to write standing up at his dresser. Yeah,
I've heard that.
Is there anything that you do to really get yourself into the zone of writing like that?
I do have funnily enough, 2,000 words a day is my target too. I didn't know that about Stephen King. And I try to achieve that. But that can take many hours, or it can happen quite quickly, depending on the mood I'm in and what distractions there are and all the usual variables. But some people plot the book out before they start. I've never done that. What I do need is the voice of the protagonist, the main character. Yeah. And if I've got that, I'm pretty confident that I'll finish the book sooner or later. So if I can't get the voice, and sometimes I'll have false starts where I think I've captured a voice, and I write a page or two or 10 or 20, and I read it back and I think, no, it's not right. Or I just know it's not right. And then I might throw it away, or I might just put it away and revisit it sometime later. But generally, if I've got the voice and the voice rings true for me, I know I'll finish the book, even though I don't know what's going to happen for most of it.
Now, one voice you did, you created and platformed around the world was of course, Ellie Linton from Tomorrow When the War Began. There was something about that. I mean, and we've experienced it ourselves in our writing, where you can find a universal theme. You know, Australia, as much as people like to say it is a monoculture, there's a lot of things that translate in every town. And the town that Tomorrow When the War Began was based in could have been in Victoria, could have been in WA, could have been Queensland, could have been in New South Wales,
or it could have been in the middle of America.
Yeah, okay, yeah, good.
Or in Europe. Or
how did can you remember what town you remember when you were writing that?
It's an amalgam of a few different towns. There's a bit of Yea in Victoria, a bit of Devonport, a bit of Mansfield and Merrijig in Victoria again. So mostly Victorian influenced, but like you say, all those towns do have some things in common. There's always a showground, there's always a pub, there's always a cemetery.
There's always the Chinese kid, Lee, you know what I mean?
That's right.
They're very much
and there's almost always a bridge, you know?
Yeah, and when I was a kid, there was always a railway hotel, and there was always a cafe run by Greek or Italian people where you could get these lavish breakfasts of steaks, sausages, eggs, bacon, and a few other things all on one huge plate. So, yeah, they do. There's always a sign saying Racecourse Road, and then underneath there's another sign saying to Racecourse, or Showground Road to the Showground. And it's like every time I see those, I kind of laugh, think, I'm back home. Yeah. I did want to capture that universality, but I also wanted to write about farm people, because when I was a kid, so many Australian novels for young people were based around rural life. And then that all seemed to disappear quite quickly, and all the books became urbanised. And I wanted to go back to that sort of rural landscape and write about the life of farm people, because there's lots of them out there, but that's not the real point. The real reason is to just kind of, reinforce something about Australia that we like to believe but don't seem to practice. We like to think that we're this iconoclastic, rustic kind of country where we're all wearing akubras and dryser bones and galloping around the paddock mustering the cattle. But the truth is that most Australians have never been outside the city limits. So I wanted to just bring that world back into focus and make people aware that there is a real world out there and it's inhabited by real people.
And you also, you gave a voice to the towny kids. There's a lot of kids, and you hear about the kids in rural scenarios, but they're usually on the property. And of course, that was Ellie, but the rest of the crew were, townies, local kids that live in town. Parents work in town. Yeah, and that is a pretty universal aspect to the whole. What was it? Wirrawee?
Yeah, that's it.
Wirrawee was the town.
Yeah. You're right. I mean, there's something kind of romantic and glamorous about the idea of galloping along on your horse and rounding up the cattle. But again, the reality is very different. There are people in the town who have to service the farms, but also run things like the libraries and the delis and the hairdressers and so on. And that life on the farm, it has its glamorous moments for sure, but it also has some sordid moments and some ugly moments and some heartbreaking moments and some incredibly boring moments. Mm-hmm. Especially if you're a crop farmer, that's a lot of that's bloody boring, just sitting on that.
Oh, now the tractors are automated. Yeah. They're driving them from the skies. It's even more boring. You just got to keep an eye on a computer screen. I think.
Is that what they're doing? It's remote control.
Yeah, wow. The tech's really growing in crop farming anyway. It's always going to be the same when you're pushing cattle, I think.
Yeah. Although the helicopters are changing it a fair bit in some areas.
So we spoke briefly at the start about the effect that Harry Potter had on young readers around the world, indeed Australia. One thing that really kicked that stone down the path was the fact that they were all turned into movies. And of course, your first book was turned into a movie. What was that process like? Like, how much of a say would you have in it as the owner of the story?
Well, very little, because that's what I chose. I mean, and it was kind of implicit from dealing with the people making the movie that's sort of what they wanted, I think. They sent me the script and then they said, read it and then we'll have a meeting. And I went through the script and I made little notations everywhere and we sat down and we started the meeting and I said, on the first page, line 17, I think that the word don't needs to be replaced by the word can't or something.
And they said we're dealing with a writer here.
Oh, God, yeah. By about the fourth time I did it, we were on about page 2 and I could see them looking at each other and I thought, maybe this isn't quite what they're looking for. So I just closed my script and said, actually, why don't you guys just go ahead and make the movie? Because I don't know anything about movies, really. I don't know the language or the techniques and all the technological stuff.
Mm-hmm. There's, of course, the other great author from Pan Mac, the great Matthew Riley, who has spent a long time trying to get one of his fantastic, great books be turned into a movie on the silver screen. What advice would you have to Matthew, to really...
I don't get it, because he set out to write scripts and then decided, well, that's not working, so I'll write a novel and then someone will make that into a movie. And here he is writing these thrillers that are absolute
banger after banger after banger.
Right. Talk about page-turners.
High octane adventures.
He's invented a new genre pretty much, because there's so much action.
I continually done the misjustice of being left in the form of print.
I think he did create a new genre, because you've seen that in Mad Max Fury Road, and then of course the most recent of the new wave of Star Wars. That was the Matthew Riley model, where it's no one goes to the toilet, no one sleeps. Like from start to finish, we are running.
No one takes the time to reload a magazine. Everyone just goes bang, 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 bang. It's just balls to the wall.
I was watching, what's that movie where the guy escapes from prison by digging the hole behind the Rockwell Welch poster?
The Shawshank Redemption.
Yeah, I watched that again the other night with the kids, and one of the things that bothers me about those movies is that everyone's so clean. Yeah. So there they are with this prison full of hardcore convicts who are all doing 30, 40 years or life, and they're all spotlessly clean, like they've all been scrubbed and they've come straight from makeup. And it's just like, geez, it's so unreal.
Yeah.
Well, that was another Stephen King short story that got turned into a big screen adaptation.
Oh, was it?
He's had hundreds.
Let's not forget Thinner. Thinner was the best.
Because I think after he made all of his money from turning The Shining into a very good movie, and Carrie and all of those ones, I think he sells his movie options for $1.
Right.
Right. Okay.
So people can be like, this is a good story, I'll just turn it in to a movie because it's a cheap script.
Because Stand By Me was a short story.
It was. It's from the same book, actually, called Seasons, which was a collection of 4 novellas,
Yeah.
which got turned into Stand By Me, Apt Pupil. There's another one in there called The Breathing Method, and then The Shawshank Redemption.
Because another thing that's wrong with Hollywood is that the cast of all the movies is still predominantly white
Yeah.
and Anglo, and I just can't understand how they still haven't grasped the idea.
The fact that they've got
dishonest.
boxing movies coming out. I always remember Southpaw with Jake Gyllenhaal as like the heavyweight boxer of the world.
Yeah,
He's
right.
from a New York orphanage and he looks like Jake Gyllenhaal. No, and his partner, what was her name? She played Regina George in Mean Girls. Anyway, it wasn't very orphanage vibes.
No.
And the third thing that's wrong, if I can just add one more, is that they solve every problem with a bullet.
Yeah.
And one of your challenges as a writer is to solve problems, but to do it in a way that is got a bit of freshness, a bit of energy, a bit of life, even a bit of imagination and creativity about it. And so solving things with a bullet is the laziest thing a writer can do. And yet that's what they go to every time.
Rambo, I think, Rambo's 90% of the last Rambo, every single person was shot directly between the eyes. They didn't stat on it.
Yeah, no.
And that's what you watch Stallone for, I suppose. But now, just back, someone like Matthew Riley's an example, an interesting example, because he has no problem writing, nations as the enemy, and South Africans, whether it's the South Africans or the North Koreans or the Russians
Or the Chinese.
or they don't do that much these days. But you kept it very vague. And,
that was deliberate.
And that was a really interesting thing for everyone, because everyone would have had a different idea who the enemies were. Obviously, when you started writing, it was kind of off the back of the Cold War. So Russian could have been a thing, but you never said what language, whether it was Latin-based or it was Asian.
The war was only down for 4 years, when the first book came out, wasn't it?
I can't remember the chronology, but that's probably right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's because this is a bit wanky, but I do like to write books that work on a number of levels. Not always. I mean, The Great Gatsby was just nothing but fart jokes, basically. But the some of them, most of them, I try to make them books where I'm exploring stuff at a deeper level as well as telling a story. And I didn't want people distracted from the multi-layered levels of the book by getting obsessive about a particular country or turning it into a racist or xenophobic kind of thing. What I was really interested in was showing what would happen with modern teenagers when they're put in the same sort of highly stressful, incredibly challenging life and death scenarios as people were in 1939 and 1914. And there was an attitude that today's teenagers would just crawl under the bed and cry for their mummies. And I didn't think that was likely. I thought that they would actually show more grit and more courage and more creativity than people expected. So, that was one of the layers of the book, was to try to show teenagers in a different light.
How did the parents of your readers react to... I mean, obviously, it's always positive if your kid's reading a book, but if your kid's reading a book about, homemade explosives and potato guns and just using firearms to shoot people in general. Did you ever get any kind of any cotton wool parents or helicopter Black
Not
Hawks?
too much, although just in the last couple of months I've been made aware of a situation in a province of Canada, which ironically is called Alabama. And I say ironically because they've had a meeting of the school board to discuss whether Tomorrow When the War Began should be banned at their school. Because Ellie has some thoughts about sex at some point. I can't remember whether she has a bit of a fantasy or just some sort of, feelings about it. Anyway, so the school board voted by 4-3 to allow the book to stay on the curriculum. So
just by the skin of its teeth.
Yeah, Tomorrow When the War Began is still acceptable in Alabama, Canada, which is a great relief.
You've had your book translated into a lot of languages. A lot of European ones. What was it? You've got all around the world. Danish.
Yeah, China, Japan.
What has been the response? Does everyone feel it? Does everyone understand it? Or is there...
Yeah, they seem to. I get
it's not
plenty of
looked
letters.
as like Ozploitation. It's not viewed as an Australian story.
No, I've never had that. I've get lots of letters from people in other countries, mainly USA, and they just get caught up in the plot and the characters. They like reading about Australia, and they like the fact that there's this kind of vast inland area where people can go camping, and at the age of 16 or whatever, you can drive the Land Rover up into the mountains. And again, like you said before, it's a kind of, there are universal sort of ideas or themes in the book, and they seem to connect with that more than anything else, which is what you'd hope for.
Well, there's lots of writers out there now that just write the one story. They initially have success with one book, and then they just keep writing the same book over and over and over again. You have had, obviously this very successful run of books in the Tomorrow series. You've also written dozens of other books. How did you find the time, and how do you put the Tomorrow sort of series on a shelf and then write something completely different?
I don't know. I'm easily bored. That's part of it. But it's the same with my reading. I'll go from reading Ernest Hemingway to reading some novel for 14-year-olds to Winnie the Pooh, back to Helen Garner. So I jump around all the time. And it's the same with writing. I personally would get bored writing the same story all the time. But I love writers who do, because when I need some sort of comfort reading, that's who I turn to. I go to Agatha Christie or P.G. Wodehouse, because that's how old I am. But nowadays I'd make different choices if I was, 20 or 30. But they're the people I grew up with. So they're the ones I still find comfort in. But I also admire the writers who can switch genre or switch plot or switch theme. So there's no merit in one course or the other, I think. Finding the time, it's just, I think that target of 2,000 words a day is a big incentive. It's like self-discipline, really.
Yeah.
Bryce Courtney wrote an article in a writing journal once, and he said that, what I thought he said was that you need burn glue when you're a writer. And I was reading this out loud to a workshop of adults without having read the article myself beforehand, which was a very silly thing to do. So I read, you got to burn glue. And they all looked puzzled, and I kept reading, thinking, God, what the hell did that mean? And then thought, I better go back and check. And it actually was bum glue. I'd misread it. He said, you need bum glue. You've got to glue your bum to the seat.
You've got to glue your bum to the seat.
You thought he needs to huff.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not a great fan of Bryce Courtney as a writer, but he was right about that. You've got to be able to glue your bum to the seat and have the self-discipline.
And he wrote too, and he wrote a whole lot of
he
different
was prolific.
themes.
Yeah.
You varied quite a lot. And one particular book I always remember is the Head book, released in 2001. That was when you just sat down and decided to write a book that people were going to read on the toilet. And I remember working with a guy at the time who we had it in the workplace toilet, and it was just a perfect thing for just. It was explaining the world in an easy, accessible kind of way. And this guy, it was that book that explained to him what Israel-Palestine was, because because no one knew what it was. It was, and you just kind of the history of it was modern history and a lot of general knowledge, all condensed in an accessible kind of. What made you think to write something like that?
I think I've become very tired of the sloganising and the superficiality of public dialogue these days. And talkback radio is a classic example, but you get it with tabloid newspapers, and you get it in conversations on the tram or the bus or wherever you go. It's just people talk in such shallow terms, and they use such meaningless language. And I want to unpack stuff. I want to know what causes things. I want to understand things at as deep a level as possible. So, for example, bullying in schools is the phrase that politicians love because they can make speeches about it, and it costs them nothing, and they sound wonderful. They sound righteous and pompous and moral when they talk about it, and everyone agrees with them and says, yes, he's right, she's right. We should stamp out bullying in schools. No one stops to think, well, what about the bullying in Parliament? And what about the bullying in caucus? And what about the bullying in political parties? And what about the bullying in everyone's workplace or
at home,
neighbourhood or in the local footy club or tennis club or croquet club? When adults stop bullying each other, kids will stop. But that's not likely to happen in our lifetimes. And I don't think there is any particular problem about bullying in schools compared to other areas. It's just that's a slogan which no one seems to bother to unpack or to think about. It's just a useful phrase that you can shout out and get instant agreement and wild hand clapping from your devotees.
And it also covers a lot of issues, whether that be mental health issues or crime, or it can kind of explain it. In America, with all these shootings, it kind of gets put down to bullies a lot of the time as well. Yeah, well before the firearm.
And a lot of the bullying, so-called bullying in schools, and I've said this in my new book, which I should mention at some point.
Yeah. Don't worry, we'll get there.
Oh, okay, no worries. I'm just. I have said in that a lot of the so-called bullying in schools is actually kids giving feedback to each other, but in an unsophisticated way because they haven't been taught to do it sort of gently and carefully and with every word delicately chosen. So when a kid says to another kid, "You're just a hog and we don't want you in our team at lunchtime, then the kid says he's been bullied. But what they're saying is you're selfish with the ball. You need to pass it to a person in a better position when that happens rather than shoot for goal yourself. And that's good feedback. But it's not conveyed subtly and it's not conveyed in a sophisticated way.
They rip the Band-Aid off. That's what they do.
Yeah, that's right. And that's the way kids are. That's a direct way of letting people know what they need to do.
It might be common knowledge to a lot of Australians, or it might not. But you're an educator now yourself. You're back educating after your writing. You founded a school.
Yeah, I did something pretty reckless. And 14 years ago, I started my own school in Victoria. And then about 4 years ago, I started another one. So they're 20 minutes apart. So I spend a lot of time now zapping backwards and forwards between the two schools.
And what is the basis? It's an alternative education. I mean, I've seen it on the news as well. What was your thinking behind that? And what do you think these schools offer kids that aren't offered in the mainstream?
First and foremost, first-hand experiences.
Yeah.
So the idea that you can live your childhood and adolescence in a second-hand way by watching people on TV doing stuff and playing computer games where you're taking on the role of a two-dimensional character in an artificial world that someone else has created is not a good basis for your adult life. You need to be out there swimming in the waterhole, or you need to be playing games down in the local park with a group of other kids. You need to be out fishing. You need to be just living life at close quarters, getting your hands dirty. And I'm using kind of old-fashioned images when I talk about going fishing, but
stick with a wheel.
Yeah, but, you can be doing more than just going to the mall, watching TV or playing computer games, or going to those incredibly bleak and soulless playgrounds which now have spread across Australia like some sort of skin disease, so that every playground and every school has nothing but these utterly banal and soul-destroying playground
rubber
devices, which are all just metal and plastic.
And I suppose in your new book, it's called Growing Up.
The Art of Growing Up.
Yeah, you've kind of put all the things you've learnt, I guess, as an educator.
Yeah, it's a manifesto. The publishers used the word manifesto on the back cover copy, and I read that and thought, I suppose it is, because it's 40 years worth of dealing with young people and their parents, where I've tried to really just put it all down and set it all out there so that I can really convey what I think are important truths to them, and that's some of it would be uncomfortable for some people, I think, but nevertheless, it's so important to parent effectively that I don't think we can do anything other than really grapple with it very intensively and comprehensively.
Have you seen a change in, whether you're at book signings or at book launches or you're educating, have you seen a change in kids since, I'll just say smartphone, those kind of devices?
Dramatically. Yeah. They like I was talking about first-hand experiences, they don't have them anymore. So, like at our schools, the average kid would have, 30 nights of sleepovers a year, I suppose, from prep onwards. And that can be a camp where they go canoeing or skiing or hiking. They do tough hikes when they get older, Larapinta and Cradle Mountain, Lake St Clair. They go to WOMAD, they go to the Mona Gallery in Hobart. We've got a big group going to Poland and Germany soon, but we split them up into 3 small groups because we think that's going to be more effective. So there's about 12 kids and 2 teachers in each group. And as well as that, they go to galleries, they go to museums, they work with potters and sculptors and bush carpenters. They are getting their hands dirty every day. They're rolling down hills, they're climbing trees, they're riding ripsticks and skateboards and things called Munro boards, which are outdoor skateboards where you can go over any terrain pretty much. And they don't have brakes. And, they go bloody fast.
So you learn how to land.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Or you have some very good and trustworthy insurers, I guess.
Well, it's actually quite easy to get insurance. People use that as an excuse for not doing these things.
Yeah, I guess.
But it's not difficult. And in 14 years, we haven't had a serious injury. We've got plenty of kids with bruises and scratches and grazes. And we would, I don't know, I haven't counted the number of broken bones over 14 years, but it'd be very, very few. And that's interesting to me because in most standard schools where kids are pursuing what is meant to be a very safe life, there are far more injuries. But what we do in most schools is to take the greatest number of kids possible, pack them into the smallest space possible, allocate the fewest possible number of adults to look after them, and then impose ridiculous rules like no running, no touching each other, no swapping food. These are typical rules that you'll find in most schools nowadays. No picking up sticks. My
No
God,
cartwheels.
yeah, you'll get expelled if you pick up a stick because a twig is a deadly weapon now.
So, how did you come to find that this was, the type of education that you'd like to deliver at your school?
I just got bored listening to kids talk.
Because I've read a couple of articles where they've got I think it's a daycare or a kindergarten in Denmark where it's essentially called the bush. I think that's what the
bush kinder.
Yeah.
We have one of those.
Kind of like that.
Yeah, very much so. But except we run it right through from when they're 4 years old to when they're 18. So they're out there all the time grappling with challenges. And they're tough challenges sometimes. But we grade them. We don't send kids the 4-year-olds don't get sent to Uluru to walk from there to Kakadu. Although, come to think of it, that might be worth a try.
That's Year 12 field studies.
I got bored by the conversations with teenagers that were getting so banal. And I thought, why are they so boring? And I started listening to them more closely and realised that all they talked about was what they'd seen on TV the night before. Mm-hmm. And that was before computer games became so pervasive. Mm-hmm. But I don't want to see Bear Grylls out there eating cockroaches and scorpions. I want to go out there and eat one myself and see what it's really like.
Well, my question to you is, particularly when you look at the current political climate, with the rhetoric is kind of coming from a place of misplaced nostalgia, you know what I mean? Particularly when you look at the Pauline Hanson types and stuff, when they talk about how good things used to be, and that can be used in any kind of way. How do you separate, productive kind of activities for kids compared to, what kids used to do and when Australia was a nicer place?
Well, I unpack all that Pauline Hanson rhetoric because she's glossing over what it was really like. I grew up in the same era that she did, and it wasn't just blissful life where we
fish and chip shops
and climbing trees and all that. There was a lot of abuse. There was sexual abuse. There was physical abuse at school. We had in grade 3, for example, a teacher who had a test every Friday for us, and if you got less than 7 out of 10, you got caned automatically. So if you had dyslexia or emotional problems or learning difficulties, you just got caned every Friday as a matter of course. And she was a savage caner. She drew blood from my brother's legs when she caned him across the back of the legs because he was talking in the back row of the choir during a voluntary lunchtime choir that he'd joined. So we're talking about a time where people wore their masks very effectively when they were outdoors, but inside the family home and inside the school and in other places, there was some very ugly stuff going on. There was good stuff happening too. It was like every other era in world history. There were good things, there were bad things. But it's ridiculous to pretend that it was some sort of blissful utopian existence.
So you've gone and found the positives of, of a kind of hands-on childhood, along with the modern world, and that's kind of what you're providing students in. Yeah,
because what I did when I was taking time off teaching and doing workshops and talks instead, I went to somewhere close to 3,000 schools all around the world over a long period of time. But I'd sometimes go to 2 or 3 schools a day, and then other times I'd spend 6 weeks in one school. And as time went on, I thought, God, if I took every good idea I've seen and put them all in one school and discarded every bad idea, every unworkable activity or endeavour, then I'd have a pretty remarkable school. And so that's what kind of led to it. I just thought, okay, that's what I'll do. And,
so how do you feel about this title, an edu-curator?
Yeah, nice. I love words. And
well, he's got a manifesto now, everyone. So dig in.
Could be the title of my next book.
So one of the biggest takeaways from this new book is that if you've got a teenager who is boring, read the book and hopefully try and add a bit of pizzazz.
But it's children. It's like 4-year-olds. We have great difficulties with some parents teaching them not to make their children's lunches for them, because a 4-year-old can make a perfectly successful sandwich and a drink to go with it. And on that sandwich, they might put sardines, tomato, Vegemite, and pineapple. But you know what? They'll eat it. If they make it themselves, they always eat them.
That's no different to pop, you know. Your old
And they won't make it again.
Grandpa's eating that rubbish anyway. Your grandpa ate cheese and peanut butter. What's the difference? Let the kids eat the same thing.
Yes, cycle of life, I suppose. But we have to really coach some parents in backing off and not standing there saying, "Oh, I'll just cut this up for you, and I'll cut all the edges off the slices of bread because the child doesn't like to eat the crusts, and I'll peel the apple for you. And do you want to cut into quarters or halves or eighths?" They just need to back off, and that's a very hard thing for many parents to do. But if they want their children to be successful adults, then they have to do it.
So you might now have alumni out of your kind of schools, that you can see in the real world.
Yeah, absolutely.
It varies what they get into, or what their strengths are.
Yeah, it varies widely, but I'd say success rate, to use another glib phrase, is extremely high. Yeah. They're doing remarkable things. They're doing wonderful things. I mean, what I said to them when they started was, whatever door you want to open when you leave school, you should be able to open that door. And if you come to a door and it won't open because we haven't taught you what you need to know, then we've failed. So if they want to open a door that leads them into doing medicine or law or dentistry or something at a prestigious university, then they should be able to open that door. If they want to go to India and work with disadvantaged people, or to do a meditation course that runs for 10 years, then that door should be open to them as well. If they want to be an apprentice joiner or cabinet maker, again, that door should be open to them. So that's a big thing to take on. And what we do to try to achieve success in that way is to develop a genuine inner strength that will sustain them and give them the courage and the creativity to attempt things, and to attempt them in such a way that they're likely to succeed. So it's not that kind of glib American confidence that enables people to prattle on like I'm doing at the moment and project this kind of aura of invincibility, like a Donald Trump figure, because when you unpack that stuff, it usually is very false, and it's all about masks. We're looking for something a bit more authentic.
And that's all in the book, a bit of that?
Yeah, well, I've packed as much as I can in, and it's 400 pages. There's a fair bit packed in there.
Well, that's the art of growing up. As we said, you've cast a wide net. You've got all the young parents that listen to us rushing out to get that, but you've also got every young Australian, old Australian that grew up reading John Marsden will be looking at that as well. Thank you for joining us today, Mr. Marsden. It's been a pleasure.
Great. No,
and
thanks,
a rare honour.
Clancy.
Thank you.
Oh, I've enjoyed it. Thank you.